The man lifts the woman's skirt, slapping the woman's thighs with force. He shows his sister how strong the black man is, and then he asks her to touch it too. But the sister is not interested in this. She was more interested in the black man's daughter than in the black man's daughter. The blacks panicked but could do nothing to stop them, because they are the owners of the farm and the black man is a slave. He could not resist. In the end, he had to watch as his daughter was taken away. When the girl was brought back to the farm, the owner gave her a new name, Mary. Mary was not assigned to work in the fields. Instead, she stayed with her mistress. She stayed with her mistress as her personal servant. In the blink of an eye, Mary had grown into an 18-year-old girl, although she had been with her mistress for a long time. But Mary always held a grudge against her mistress. Not only would she tear up her mistress' clothes, she would also make a fool of her mistress by joining forces with other black people. On this day, the hostess wanted to host a Christmas dinner at her home. She ordered the housekeeper to prepare the ingredients. And bring back some candles. But what the hostess didn't expect was, the housekeeper had deliberately inflated the price of the candles.
How can they be that expensive?
It is not that the candles be expensive, Mrs. It is just that you cannot afford them.
The mistress of the house was outraged by these words. She went up to the housekeeper and slapped him across the face. But it didn't calm the black man. Instead, it increased the black man's anger. It provoked revenge. In the preparation of the dinner, not only did they use torn bed sheets as tablecloths, they deliberately lit broken candles to smother the people. Mary saw the hostess making a spectacle of herself and laughed in the corner. But that's not all. Mary also secretly stole the hostess's wine. Unfortunately, a white man found out about it. The white man called Mary to him and reprimanded her. He also gave Mary a few lashes. In the meantime, he molested Mary. At this point, Mary is at her wit's end. But then a group of soldiers came in. It turned out to be a rebellion by the blacks on the farm to the west. They had set fire to the farmer's estate. All the men are now needed to put down the rebellion. At this point, the man of the house has forgotten about Mary's theft and left Mary behind and told her to look after the mistress and left with the others. Seeing the master leave the manor, Mary was in a better mood. But the mistress, who was always crying and whining, but Mary was disturbed by her mistress, who was always crying. So Mary lied to her mistress and told her that there would be a disturbance here. The mistress needed to go to the city for shelter. When the timid mistress heard this, she rushed to pack her bags and left in a carriage overnight. And Mary, who has succeeded in her scheme, is completely out of her depth. Not only does she wear her mistress' clothes, wearing her mistress' perfume, and took the man she liked with her, and slept in her master's bed. Early the next morning, there was the familiar sound of a horse-drawn carriage outside the window. Mary realized instantly that the farmer had returned. She rushes to hide under the bed with the man. But what she didn't expect was, the owner returned to the house and shot himself. This drew all those outside the door in. The mistress was so frightened that she sat up in bed. But before she could get warmed up, she was startled by the sound of voices under the bed. As the men were outside, the soldiers did not see Mary. The man was pulled out. The mistress immediately accused the man. She said that she had seen him kill the man. In response, the soldiers intended to shoot the man on the spot. But Mary came out in time. She pushed the soldier back. She took the man and ran away quickly. They made their way to the black settlement on the farm. This is where Mary was born as a child. So the people here helped them hide, but eventually they were found. The soldier shot the man dead, and the next one was Mary. The woman's eyes were filled with fear. The soldier in front of him raises his gun, but before he could fire, the soldier was shot to the ground. It was Mary's mother. The sight of Mary, she was so excited, but there was no time to tell each other how much she missed her, because the soldier's accomplices had already come for her. Mum covers Mary's escape. She was caught and killed by the soldiers. Afterwards, Mary is sent to work in the fields. She is taken back by her mistress. The mistress is not used to being without Mary. Time passes. Britain freed its black slaves. There was a new overseer on the farm. His name was Rafi. Rafi was not like the other white men. He was against the oppression of black slaves and wanted to free them. That's why Rafi came to work here. When he arrived at the farm, Rafi gathered the blacks together and told the blacks that they had now regained their freedom. If they chose to continue working here, the farmer would pay them, but their house was not free to live in, because it was the property of the farmer. They had to pay rent. The blacks could have listened to Rafi for a while, but as soon as they heard that they had to pay rent, they broke up. Rafi thought it was because they were uncomfortable and didn't care too much. Rafi's arrival made the mistress very concerned, because the lady of the house had fallen in love with Rafi. But Rafi's heart was already full of someone else. That person was Marie. One day the two were returning in a carriage. The mistress saw them. The mistress was jealous, but she didn't panic, because she had the help of Rafi's father. Rafi could only marry her, to Mary's distress. But what Mary didn't expect was, on her wedding night, Rafi knocked on her door, and the mistress of the house was left alone all night. But the mistress didn't say anything, because Rafi had become the man of the house. Rafi stayed in Mary's house, and he had a lovely child with Mary. Happy days always go fast, and misfortune was coming, for soon it was time to harvest the sugar cane. But there was not much work on the farm. The cane was about to rot, so Rafi had to go and talk to the black people. He wanted them to work 7 days a week. He would pay double the wages, and then give them a holiday. But what Rafi didn't expect was, not only did the blacks not agree, they surrounded Rafi and sang loudly. And this was just the beginning of a nightmare. Some say Lincoln was wrong to free the black slaves, because Negroes are inert. If left unchecked, they would have been lawless, but there are those who believe that freedom for all, that's what makes a just society. Rafi, the hero, is the just man. He treats the blacks kindly. He pays the blacks who do the work. Rafi believes that under his leadership, the estate would get better and better. But what Rafi didn't expect was, the blacks on his estate were different, because the blacks on the estate had been working under control for so long. When they lost their supervision, they started to put up a mess. The sugar cane was ripe and no one was there to supervise it, but they were paid for their work for nothing. The cane was rotting in the ground. Rafi was anxious, thinking of the way the blacks were provoking him. He even began to regret his support for the emancipation of the black slaves, so that the black people could continue to work. Rafi raised the rent for the blacks, but what he didn't expect was that the black people, not only did they not work, they came to Rafi's house and provoked him. In response, Rafi again asked. The blacks were understanding, but the response was no. Rafi could not stand it any longer. He wanted to teach the blacks a lesson. Rafi drew a map.
His village is there. See it? I mean to frighten every last one of those Negroes and make it plain that I will evict anyone who does not work exactly as I direct.
They've burned down the black man's house. They've destroyed the black man's fields and made him miserable. The blacks had to agree to go back to work for a while. Rafi returned to his home in triumph. But what Rafi didn't expect was that the next day there was still no one working in the sugarcane fields. So Rafi took his tools in anger and went to work alone. But he couldn't have done it alone. Mary stepped in to stop him, but little did she know that Rafi was now cold-hearted. Seeing that Mary was no different from any other black man, he was about to strangle him, but the lady of the house stopped him in time, before he could make a serious mistake. Since then, Rafi has been very ill. The patient had all but decomposed. After a few months, Rafi finally recovered, but he refused to see Mary. Instead, he left the house secretly with his mistress. And that's not all. He had the maid take their child, and the black people who left the farm are looking for a place to live. At the end of the film, Rafi's expectations are dashed. The manor house is in ruins, but we cannot judge right from wrong. We can only wish for a more harmonious society.